Happy days. Happy days are here with the summer heat and the joy of togetherness and communion as we move into a season of graduations and a season of vacations and a season where this community that is so transient is both enriched and misses some of its members. If you are here in Loma, we are delighted to get to meet you. Please make sure you stop by and say hello. If you are not here, our warmest embrace go over to you wherever you might be. Again, we want to remind you that we only have, as of now, 4 Sabbaths until our fiscal year closes, and we still are a little bit shy of balancing our budget here at Sabbath School. So if you want to help us have and end the year with a balanced budget, please feel free to partner with us, LLUC, tab Give. Go on, scroll down the list of available possibilities for you to donate. Make sure you select Sabbath School expenses and contribute. Anything helps, from $1 to whatever you can, in order for us to close this year with a balanced budget. Want to start with a conversation that continues on this idea of the great controversy as it is connected to God's law. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and pray. So I'll invite you to pray and talk to God with us. Jesus, we thank you for the beauty that is the law of love, the law that gives us a pathway not only out of our own mores, but into an experience with you. And so as we ask questions about who we are reminded that what really matters is who you have been for us. So we ask that you continue to be for us as you have been, for we pray in your name. Amen. Joey, you don't have a French accent yet.
Not yet. I'm looking forward to gaining one in the 1 week that I will be there. So, but yeah, maybe not a French accent, but a taste for French croissants. That's what I'm looking forward to.
That was an accent. Croissants. And yeah. Joey said croissant. That's what we have. We're excited to have you go, not because we don't like you here, but I hear it's going to be fun. It's a fun time with your family. So go with our blessings and enjoy everything that France has to offer, except the escargot, because that's that's kind of gross.
Yeah, I don't know if I ate meat, if I would still, or I wasn't a vegetarian or an Adventist, if I would eat escargot. That's a little bit out of my willingness to explore and be a risk taker, I would say.
I don't remember that sheet that Peter saw containing escargot, so be that as it may.
Yeah, summer's here, and with summer comes a lot of change. You had a graduation in your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my little one graduated just this past week, so that was exciting. We've got our one of my nieces that is graduating Loma Linda Academy today, so we're excited for the baccalaureate. We're even more excited for tomorrow as we get to cheer her on. Busy time, as you know. Our School of Religion, our own School of Religion, is celebrating its award ceremony tomorrow, so that's a big deal for our little religion students here, our MS and chaplaincy students primarily. They get to have the spotlight on them for a couple hours, so that's going to be good. It's a fun time.
Yeah. And then you will be leaving soon for Kenya.
Yes, we leave on Monday, so we're here for 2 more days. And no escargot in Kenya, but we'll be there, and both of us won't be here for a little bit. You'll be gallivanting in Paris, and I'll be doing the Lord's work in Kenya. Notice what I did there.
It really can't compare, but I'm sure you'll have as much fun or maybe even more than I do.
No, it's a great group. We're taking a great group of people. So we're excited. We're excited about God. God always does some interesting things. I'm even more excited because I get to spend some time around a campfire with Dustin and Lindsay, who moved to Kenya from Tennessee, and we get to have some conversations, which is always fun.
Yeah, for those of you that weren't around or don't remember, Dustin was a part of our team. Like 8-9 years ago, is that right?
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
It was a while ago, and he was just a wonderful Christ-loving guy. Always had like a burden for some of the things that we're doing now, and even the building that we sit in was kind of a large result of his capacity to dream. So it's going to be exciting to share some time with him.
That's so great. Yeah. And we can't wait to hear your stories when you come back.
Likewise. Likewise. We're going to be very excited to hear how you managed, because the French don't like the sound of English, so maybe you'll pretend you're actually from Korea while you're there.
Maybe I can do that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Use an American passport to get in, and then pretend I'm Korean.
You're Korean while you're there. That's the plan.
That's the plan.
I'm sure they'll treat you much better.
Yeah, but both of us are taking a break, sabbatical, if you will, from this time, and we're talking about the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. It's gonna be exciting. So, Joey. Lot of stuff with the lesson, right? The Sabbath, central to who we are in our identity. I think we, though, come at the Sabbath with a little bit of a different perspective. So I'm excited for the conversation. But what stood out to you as we kind of reflected on this idea of Sabbath, law, Adventism, and the great controversy?
Yeah. That first lesson, this Sabbath's lesson, where it talked about the connection between the sanctuary, the law, and the Sabbath, right? Talking about looking into the most holy place and seeing the Ark of the Covenant in there with the law of God in there and the Sabbath commandment as the fourth commandment in that tablet. I was just thinking about what the Sabbath means to us and what the Sabbath does for us. And I think for us that Sabbath is a crucial practice that helps remind us. One of the things it does is it reminds us that God is God and we are not, right? It is a part of the weekly rhythm of our lives to say, because we are limited human beings, we need to take a break. And God even commands us to take a break, because he knows that that is best for us, that we are not built, we are not designed as creations to work and not rest, that we have to have that rhythm of work and rest. Like you talk about engagement and retreat, right? That rhythm is so essential to our lives. And that's one of the most beautiful things that Adventism shares with the larger community of Christianity, is this idea of the centrality of that practice, reminding us that God is God and we are not.
I completely agree with you. I think the connections might be even a bit deeper than the surface level that we as Adventists kind of immediately revert to. Yeah. The sanctuary, as we talked about last week, really is about the abiding presence of God. It is our capacity to view ourselves as the sanctuary, as the place in which God desires to dwell, as this. And the call of the sanctuary for us to celebrate a God that is both Adventist in the sense that he dwells with us, and relational in the sense that, as Jesus says, I want to abide in you. And picking up, I think, that very Pauline concept of us being sanctuary, us being temple. And then you start asking questions about, what does that mean? What does it mean that I am called to be this temple, to be this sanctuary, to be this place where God desires to dwell? And then the idea that built into this notion are certain mechanisms by which to safeguard the temple, and how Sabbath, both in a very functional way, is a mechanism to take care of the temple, i.e., ourselves, but it's also the ultimate expression of this message of interdwelling, right? We dwell in God and God dwells in us. Well, you only have, in order for that enmeshment to occur, you need to have time. And so Sabbath really is not only in very practical ways the way in which we safeguard ourselves, but in more philosophical ways, it is the perfect stage for this enmeshment between us and God.
Wow. I love that, because often when we talk about the imagery of the sanctuary, what's present there is this idea of us moving into through the sanctuary as we're drawing closer to God, right? That we go from the courtyard to the holy place, to the most holy place. And the imagery that's present in the Old Testament and in Hebrews is those barriers are now torn open with Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, and the way is open for us to enter into that most intimate place of God. So there is this idea of us drawing near to him. But what I love about what you're saying is, as we draw near to him, he's also drawing near to us, and he's coming into us. So that passage that you alluded to in John chapter 14, abide in me, he's saying, abide in me and I in you, right? So we abide in him and he abides in us. And that is the ultimate fulfillment of that sanctuary message, is that God dwelling among us doesn't mean that he's in one spot at one place at one time, but that he is in all of us, and that we are his people and we are in him and he is in us. Not so much in a pantheistic way, but more in the way that he describes in this relational way that he describes in John chapter 14.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make that distinction, because Adventists do have a murky history with, well, if everything in the world bears the image of the Creator, then is everything God? And we say no.
Yeah.
But everything does have or does bear the signature or the imprint of the Creator. The old ancient Christian idea of Imago Dei, you are made in the image of God, that literally meant that you as a vessel were made to house the very presence of God. In that journey that you're talking about, that spiritual journey, which is moving from the outer courtyard to the holy place, to the most holy place, that journey really isn't about growing closer to God. That journey, I think, is about becoming more aware of the presence of God, where the closer you get to the most holy place, it's impossible to ignore the presence of God as you enter the Holy of Holies, because the Shekinah is there. And so it cannot be ignored. It cannot be confused. It isn't muddled by the conversation that is happening in the courtyard, or the theological debates that usually occurred in the courtyard. There is no distraction with kind of these things that of systematized religion that are really good. The rituals and rites of systematized religion are good because they ultimately give a framework for our lives, but sometimes those are misused or weaponized. And so you think of the holy place and kind of the hustle and bustle of the sacrifice and the sacrificial system that occurred there, not on the Day of Atonement, but kind of the everyday sacrifices. And then you had the most holy place. And in that place, there really isn't, it's devoid of all the trappings of religion. It is only being face to face with the presence of God. And I think that in a really powerful way, I think represents a perfect description of what the formational journey is, from really focusing on the debates on theology, important as those are, to then choose a theological system that you agree with, and having that become kind of the center, and then moving probably or hopefully into a deeper recognition that really in the end all that matters is you and God, and God in you. And as the old patristic fathers used to say, I in God and God in me, and I have the light.
That's beautiful. That's so poetic. Yeah. Yeah, that is the ultimate goal, is that union with God without any other of the other trappings or the other barriers that get in the way of that relationship. And I also like how as that union happens, we there is almost a self-examination that is a part of it. As Ellen White talks about in Steps to Christ, she talks about the nearer that we grow to Christ, the clearer our awareness of our own sin becomes, right? So instead of, as we draw near to Christ, us believing we are more and more perfect, although we are growing more and more into into his image, it actually challenges us to see in comparison where the where the cracks are, and for that to become more and more clear. So that also journey, and I love how John Mark Comer talks about this, that in order to walk with Christ in this discipleship journey, we also have to take an inward journey, understanding our sinfulness, our brokenness, that recognition of the sin done in us, done to us, done around us, that sin that pervades our lives and the worlds around us, that unless we take time to actually deal with those things with God, that the union with God becomes stifled.
Yeah, and perhaps that then is a microcosm not just for the doctrine of the sanctuary, but for what Sabbath truly should look like. The Comer, I like Comer, because Comer is a throwback. Comer would be, I think, much more comfortable writing in the 8th century from Cappadocia. So the idea of that process that he talks about really has its roots in this, in a very Eastern way of looking at the journey. We call it the discipleship journey. They would just call it Christian life, right? And so in order for you to enter into that journey, there are 3 primary stages that you repeat time and time and time again. And the first one is examinatio. So you have this process of self-examination. Where are my as I encounter the light of the gospel, what are those areas of my life that light needs to be shown upon? And then you have oratio, the practice of prayer. So now I've done that self-examination, that assessment, and now I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray very specifically for these areas. And then you have the third, so you have oratio, examinatio, regocijatio, celebration. And so I think that's a really neat way of maybe even partitioning your Sabbath. Sabbath opens on Friday night, and it's a perfect place, a perfect time to engage in the process of self-examination. How was my week? In what ways did I love well? In what ways did I support those people around me? In what ways, as a family, are we growing closer? In what ways, as a family, we were torn apart? And then the actual Sabbath day, you start and you wake up, and you come to church, and it should be a place and a time for prayer, for a deeply connected experience of just laying it all after you've examined, laying it all, and then Sabbath evening, as you said, you close Sabbath with this wonderful celebration.
Yes.
So I think it works both for the sanctuary and for the Sabbath, and it's interesting how when you start seeing so many parallels, not merely because of this arbitrary concept of law that often we throw around, but the parallels kind of are built uh, out of this desire for intimacy.
Wow. I love that. I love that pattern that you talk about as a way of beginning the Sabbath. That's something that I'd like to try with my family. Just start with examining, confessing, looking at our previous weeks, seeing the ways that we've lived and the ways that we've loved and how we failed and how God has helped us succeed. Like it's something that our family does with the phrase, what are the roses and the thorns, right, of the week, and then praying for forgiveness, praying to do better, and then entering a time of celebration. I love that. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it's less arbitrary than just saying, well, it's the right day. Although, I mean, the Bible is the Bible, and we take the Bible seriously. But I get nervous when sometimes our denomination, and it's not simply akin to our denomination. It happens everywhere. We get into these big conspiracy theories of, well, there was these machinations behind the scene, and the beast decided to change the day from Sabbath to Sunday. There were, to be sure, political realities that mattered, and to be sure, the church, the Christian church, once it was co-opted by the powers and the principalities of this world, we did a lot of harm. But I hesitate to think, and this is maybe just encounter as the more I encounter God's grace upon my life, the more I'm willing to extend other people that grace. And our fellow Christian brothers and sisters that will sit together and pray tomorrow and worship the same God that we're worshiping today, I don't think they do so with nefarious intents. Our colleagues, right? Our colleagues that'll preach powerful gospel-oriented sermons from pulpits around the world in many denominations tomorrow. I don't think they wake up, or at least the majority of them, I don't think they wake up with nefarious attempts to counterfeit the Sabbath. I think there are people who desperately need Jesus in other denominations, just like there are people who need Jesus desperately within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And ultimately, I think we can be beastly antichrist within the Adventist Church every bit as we can be beastly antichrist or counterfeit Christians in any other denomination.
Yeah. We talk a lot here about the necessity to assume best intentions. And I love how you're saying that we should be extending that principle to those who are not a part of the Adventist Church, to our Christian brothers and sisters who are in other denominations and in other traditions of faith, and not just assume, because there have at times in our most extreme moments, and maybe in our less than most extreme moments, when we've associated the workings of Satan and the devil to individual people who are part of different organizations, right? And to say, well, if they are a part of the Catholic Church, they must be under the tutelage of the devil. And that is far from true. That is not true. I think you make a great point in saying that just because somebody comes from a different faith background than we do does not mean that they are not faithfully following Jesus, right, in their tradition. My question, though, is, does that preclude the fact that Satan is behind the scenes and is trying to direct the course of history in a certain direction, just much as like God is directing the course of history in certain directions? Even if we take out individual people from that, is it fair to say that Satan is trying to manipulate the course of history?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to be even more stringent, and ask a more uncomfortable question: does Satan use, or has Satan used the church in order to further his message? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Would it have been better for the Christian church to continue not just the practice of Sabbath as a day, as the seventh day, but the practice of Sabbath in its philosophy? Yes. Had the church continued the philosophy of Sabbath, America, in the way that America was built and constructed, would have shifted. It would have been we are by nature, and maybe this is uncomfortable for you, because I think Sabbath, the actual spirit of Sabbath, is less about what day you go to church and more about how you view reality, right? So if the philosophy of Sabbath was present, then America probably now is both less capitalistic and less consumeristic. And so I think Adventists, and let's face it, I love my capitalism and my consumerism. And so it's very easy for me to say, Catholics who change the date and the times, they're the beast. When in reality, I have bought into the myth of American exceptionalism and consumerism and capitalism, which completely denudes not the day, I'm keeping the day right, but it denudes the whole spirit of Sabbath, right? 6 days you try to master the world around you, but the seventh day is about mastering yourself. And we have a lot of issues with mastering ourselves within the Adventist church. So had the philosophy of Sabbath been firmly entrenched within the church, the Christian church, the world would have looked much different. You probably don't have the same economic inequalities that you do now. You probably would have had, you probably don't have the dispossession of Native Americans from their soil. You probably don't have the exploitation of people of color. You probably don't have slavery. Had we really, really, really captured that. So I think that Satan uses the church because there is a counterfeit. And then I ask now the question, who is the real enemy out there? I read a lot of articles that get put out by certain sectors of our church. And I wonder if, looking at other Christian traditions or looking at comments, whether you agree with comments that come out of the Vatican today or not, looking at them and thinking they're the enemies, when the real enemy out there is secularism, I wonder if Satan isn't using our inherent mistrust about other communities of faith in order to anesthetize us to the real danger out there, which isn't other Christian denominations that are trying to follow Jesus faithfully. It's the assent that grows in the world that says there is nothing and there is no moral compass and everything is relative. and you are your own God. I find that a much more threatening reality than anything else.
Wow. Wow, there's so many things I want to explore in what you just said, especially this piece about um, the how the enemy is not just one organization in one place out there, right? That we've talked about this before, how we can be that even in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, at times we have followed the beast and we have demonstrated beastly characteristics. So I'm going to put a pin on that. We're going to come back to that. But I want to expand a little bit more on what you said about secularism as being the main enemy of this time and of this age. For those who are not clear about what secularism is, would you define that for us?
Sure.
And what threat it poses to us?
Sure, I think, and we've talked about this without getting into any historical analysis, right?
Yeah.
It starts with a shift in the 18th and 19th century, and that shift, I think, emerges from as a critique of the church. So did Satan use the church? Absolutely. The church was used to such a degree that the populace at large said, well, that which was promised through faith and religion really hasn't been accomplished, i.e. a better world. And so starting primarily with France in the 1700s, there was kind of this new light of enlightenment. And really, when you follow the idea trace, it boils down to this notion of secular humanism. The notion of secular humanism simply boils down to the concept that I am my own God. I define what is moral. I am the ultimate arbiter of what is true. And my capacity to reason ultimately is prioritized above everything else. And thankfully, even with that outside of the church, because the church is still in its echo chamber having its discussions on, well, let's face it, on, is the Pope the beast and is the New World Order coming? In our echo chambers, the critique about secular humanism is coming from outside, from the world itself, reminding us of Jesus's words that if we don't prophesy, the rocks themselves will prophesy. And the questions about secular humanism are, well, really, are you the ultimate arbiter of truth? Because it seems to us that you have a lot of baggage and hang-ups. And so there is a growing wave that is attempting to ask questions about postmodernism or secular humanism. I'll use the terms interchangeably, though they're not always interchangeable. But the questions are saying, no, there needs to be an anchor that we all agree upon as true. But the church is, I think the church could be leading those discussions. Sadly, we're not really, say for a few pockets here and there, we're not really in those conversations. We're having other conversations.
Yeah, that because we're so focused on the threat from inside, we don't see what's happening outside. And how you describe secular humanism sounds eerily similar to what the serpent said to Eve in Genesis chapter 3, right?
Yeah.
You can be like God. You can take the place of God. You can decide with knowledge to what is good and what is right and what is true. And you're saying that I love actually how Tony Campolo, Christian sociologist and philosopher, he talks about this, how humanism took a big hit with the advent of cancer, right? Because the belief was through science, through reason, through logic, we can conquer all barriers. We can promote human life, and for a long time it did. It lengthened There was advancements in knowledge and technology. Human survival rates became higher. Infant mortality dropped. All of these things, and then we hit something called cancer. And despite all of our research and all of our fighting, we still don't have a cure for cancer. And we're finding it's a lot more complicated than that. That different cancers react in different ways, and that the world is a lot more complicated than in the 1800s we assumed it to be. We thought the world was very mechanistic and simple, and when we can find that mechanism, then we can define the whole world. But in doing so, we actually caused a lot more disruption in the world. And the times when we've tried to control the world around us, we've actually caused lots of problems. Like, for example, agriculture. We did single crop farming, and it worked great for a while, and we were able to produce so much more grain doing it that way, and it was so much easier to farm. But then it created a host of other problems, and then we had to use things like very strong pesticides and genetically modified organisms, and all of these things that we've had to technologically engineer, which have had unintended consequences for us. And so we're discovering that the world is a lot more complicated, and then people are now thinking, can we ever understand the world enough for us to control it? Perhaps that points to something greater. And that's the echo that you're talking about is coming back from the world. One that Christians sometimes are not as engaged as we should be.
And I think that whole history, which you've outlined so well, is a direct result of there is, if you want to lay the blame on anywhere, the blame should be laid squarely at the doorstep of any cathedral or the atrium of any church. For the majority of human history, science and religion were symbiotic. Thomas Aquinas famously says, there is no debate, there is no battle between science and religion. Science is the handmaiden of religion. And so it was assumed that there was this very close connection, because ultimately, with any scientific discovery, the question that people were going to ask is, well, how far should we push? And the purpose of religion was to ask not the question, how far should we push, but what is right? And in the Middle Ages, that changed. The scientific realities and science was exploding at such a degree that religion found the necessity to stop asking those questions and to start controlling religion. And so this science, and this barrier became cemented. And so, whereas for the majority of human history, science invited people of faith to the table to have those conversations. Now, it's not people of faith that are invited to those conversations.
Wow.
When you look, for example, at the development of, to use an example you laid out, agriculture. No one of faith was asked, hey, should we move to single crop farming? Now, for the majority of human history, people knew not to do that, because ultimately you were going to denude the earth and you were going to diminish any kind of nutrients, and so you would do cycle planting, right? You would cycle through farm. In the 1800s here in America, capitalism takes over, and the need not just to produce to feed your own plot, but this idea of massive production. And we said, well, we need to produce either cotton or corn. Corn is a big one. And now here we are producing corn in places where corn ought not to grow. And nobody's asking ethical questions about what does that do to our environment. Actually, people are asking ethical questions. about but they're not asking ethical questions because they're people of faith. And that's, I think, the great tragedy. And I love a lesson. This is to our general conference. I'd love a lesson that asks those questions, that says, how can we, and maybe it'll come next quarter, fingers crossed, how do we as people of faith enter the marketplace of ideas and stand for what is true from our position of faith without seeming fanatical. I'd love to have people of faith arguing for sustainable farming. Yeah. Sadly, that's not why we're arguing for and hello, sustainable farming is in the book. The book talks about sustainable farming.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. We've talked about this before, but there's a documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. And it's just, I just love what they do, because what their journey, and it's a journey of a couple who don't know anything about agriculture, but decide to buy a farm and to do this kind of sustainable farming where it's not single crop. And they follow the principles of this guru that is written about this. And it's terrible at first, and it's hard. But what they learn is they learn to work with the principles of nature, the principles of God that God has placed in their nature, instead of trying to control nature, right? And that is the message of the Sabbath, right? The message of the Sabbath is that we are not meant to control. We are meant to work alongside. God is already at work in this world. We are to discover the work that God is doing and then work alongside. That was the call of Adam and Eve. I know that the word present there is dominion, and sometimes we get in this imagery in our mind that dominion means that we get to control it, that everything is under our control, and that we are the kings. But that's not the principle that we find in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. It is to come alongside the work that God has already done and work to promote that act of creation, to work alongside the God who is already at work. And that, again, is why God ends the creation day of the week with the Sabbath, as a reminder that, yes, I've given you dominion, but remember that in the true order of things, you are also a created being, created to live out the principles that I've already placed in this world. You're not to change them or to remake them in your own image, but to live out the image that I've placed in you.
Maybe those are the times and the laws that we really should be looking at, how they've changed. We talk about the beast changing the time and the laws. Throughout Revelation, it seems pretty evident, right, that the primary thing that the beast does is it dehumanizes and it is wasteful. There's enormous waste. It is and it is dehumanizing. Just stay with this idea of farming, and I know this isn't a farming show, folks.
And we don't know that much about
farming.
I'm sure there's somebody in the Midwest saying, "Oh, no, you're."
But if you're in the Midwest, tell me if I've got this wrong, because I've been reading up on this week. So corn is the biggest crop that really the big crop that is produced in America is corn. And I love corn. Corn, you can't have 4th of July without corn. And then I found out that a very small percentage of corn is for human consumption.
Yeah.
The biggest, then still a bigger percentage of corn is planted to feed, as feed. But that's not the biggest use of corn in America. The big farms in America that produce corn do so to produce ethanol. And as you know, ethanol is touted as a eco-friendly alternative to fuel. And I don't know that much about ethanol or fuel, but I do know this. They did a study looking at how much it costs to produce a gallon of ethanol. And the cost to the environment far outweighs the gains of burning this quote unquote cleaner fuel. And when you ask, well, why the waste? Well, why the waste is because there are energy companies that for whom it is very important to keep producing ethanol because it improves their bottom line. And so here you have a company, a faceless, nameless corporation, pillaging natural resources in order to create more income. And when you read and you hear this and you see that that's a lot of that this, while I don't have a problem with most economic systems because I realize that none of them is perfect, I do have a problem with unbridled capitalism, with no restraint, just free market, let the market do what it pleases. Because you read Revelation and you hear this idea of fear God and give him glory. He created the heavens and the earth and the springs of water, and you realize that it's about our relation to creation. And then you realize that the same book has a curse for those that mistreat the world. And I'm wondering, what would it look like to have somebody with a winsome, loving Christian attitude in those boardrooms saying, wait a second, I'm here as a person of faith, but I am also, and I'm here because I think that my Jesus calls for restraint. And that can be on anything, on natural resources, farming, as we've been talking about, the creation of drugs and medications. I find that there's very few Christian ethicists in those areas because we are more concerned with what the Pope said to 60 Minutes last week.
Yeah. That we as humans, we're not given this world to use and abuse it, but to care for it and to promote life in it, just as God created life on this earth. And that using and abusing attitude, like you've pointed out, that is the spirit of the beast, more than anything else. And the reason why we've at times said that pointed out that it tramples on the law of God is because the law of God is built on the principle of love. So trampling on the law of God is trampling on that principle of love and using force. And the imagery that we see of the beast over and over again in the book of Revelation, especially leading up in Revelation 13, leading up to that phrase about the mark of the beast, that infamous mark of the beast, 666. The description that it has of the beast is, I mean, it's terrible. It says it deceives the inhabitants of the earth. It's given power to cause confusion and kill those who refuse to worship it. Or, I mean, it's all about force and destruction and manipulation and lies. That's the way of the beast. And we're wrapping up our discussion, but I love how it's ending where you began, with this idea that spirit of the beast is not just inherent in one denomination or in one people. It's inherent in all of us, right? It's a part of all of us, and it's something that we need to. It is the flow of the stream of history because Satan is in control of this world right now. But what God did, what Jesus did on the cross, allows us to step out of that stream or work against that stream and to walk in the way of the Lamb, to change the direction of that stream. That is the call of humanity. That is the call. That is the true, if you want to say, the Adventist message, right? Is not just to point fingers at another denomination and say, you are living the principles of the beast, but to look and examine ourselves and to say, what are the beastly ways that we've behaved in? How have we treated others? How have we treated this world in beastly ways? And to say, God, forgive me and help me to live in the way of the Lamb.
Yeah, and that's the examination part, both individual and corporately, that I think you need to engage in. And then there's the prayer part. And I would love for our prayer to be, how can we reach out to the 2.4 billion Christians in the world that worship the same Jesus and say, the stream of history over the past 100 years is not one that honors God. And do we dare and change the tide of human history? And I think we can, by the way. I think 2.4 billion people can turn around and say no to the abuse of the environment, no to the abuse of our fellow human beings, yes to care and consideration, both for the world that God has given us and for the brothers and sisters that he has placed us here with. And if we do that, then maybe, just maybe, we will conclude our lives, whether it's in the New Jerusalem or on our deathbeds, with celebration. Joey, pray for us.
Amen. Our good and gracious God, as Seventh-day Adventists, we ask that you help us to not just keep the day of the Sabbath, which is important, but also live out the spirit of the Sabbath in the ways that we care for others, in the ways that we live out your principles of love. Help us to live out that spirit in our everyday lives, is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So take care of yourself, take care of one another. Go out today. Why don't you? The day is beautiful. Enjoy nature. Eat some corn, roast it in the company of those whom you love, and tell somebody out there, I love you, because ultimately that's all that matters, right? Have a good week. We'll see you next week.